Hey guys, James here again with another Civ 6 guide, and today I want to talk about Rise and Fall, the first major expansion for Civ 6. Up till now, as part of my tutorial series, we've discussed tips and tricks to manage your empire for the base game, and hopefully at this point, you've enjoyed the game enough to grab one of the expansions. So in this video, I wanted to give a quick rundown on the mechanics that Rise and Fall adds, as well as some tips on how to approach these new mechanics. Again, my goal is to try and teach you the mechanics so you can explore them, rather than trying to tell you exactly what to do. So enough dilly-dallying, let's dive into this. Rise and Fall. So of course, as the name Rise and Fall implies, the biggest new mechanic added to the game is the addition of ages. Firaxis basically added this mechanic as a way of simulating the ups and downs of an empire, and I really do like it as a mechanic. Here's how it works. Unlike in the base game, the whole world now enters new ages together based on the progress of all civilizations in the game. During each age, civilizations earn era score based on their achievements, and these achievements can include finding goodie huts, building unique units, building cities in weird terrain, and much more. I suggest checking out the Real Era Tracker mod to get a more comprehensive list of all the different achievements out there. Check out the card in the top right for part 1 of my mods video. Keep in mind too that there are some achievements which can only be achieved once in the entire game, once per civ, and there are some which are repeatable. Each era, you have certain thresholds of era score you need to reach in order to enter a dark, normal, or golden age. This can be seen on the era screen here, or at the bottom of your turn button. The threshold required for different ages in the next era is calculated based on your era score when the era changes. This is important to note as, if you can help it, I would suggest trying to save some achievements for the next era if you already hit the threshold for a golden age. So why do ages matter? There are two main areas affected by your age. The first is your dedication. At the start of every era, you can choose dedications. If you enter into a dark or normal age, you can select from a list of 4 dedications, and these dedications will give you different methods of increasing your era score to help you get into a golden age in the next era. To best choose a dedication, I would consider where you are in the game and what you plan on doing in this era. So for example, if you're starting to build a lot more infrastructure, consider using Monumentality. If you're starting to spread your religion, consider using Exodus of the Evangelists. Meanwhile, in a golden age, you also get to select dedications. However, during golden ages, these dedications give you bonuses, rather than a method of increasing your era score. Similar to other ages, to best choose dedications, I would consider what your plan for this era is, and select based on what you plan on doing. Using the same dedications as before, if you're planning on building up your cities, particularly with builders, or expanding further, I would consider using Monumentality. If you're, again, just starting to spread your religion, consider using Exodus of the Evangelists. These dedications will change based on what stage of the game you're in, so be sure to familiarize yourself with which ones come up when. There's actually one other cool thing you can do with regards to ages. If you're able to jump from a dark age into a golden age the next era, you get what's called a heroic age. In a heroic age, instead of selecting one of 4 golden age dedications, you can actually select 3. This makes your civilization gain some pretty crazy bonuses and be huge in helping you catch up or dominate the game. Hitting a golden age at key points in the game can be pivotal, and I think this is particularly true as you'll want to make sure to hit a golden age as you reach the end game. Keep in mind though, the age you enter will affect the thresholds you need to reach. So for example, when you're in a golden age, your threshold to escape a dark age or achieve another golden age next era is higher. Keep in mind too that during golden ages, you also don't have the dedications to help you gain additional era score, so this makes it even harder to avoid dark ages following a golden age. A dark age isn't all bad though. In dark ages, you get access to some pretty interesting and potentially powerful dark age policy cards. These policies can have potentially huge bonuses for your civ, but will usually have some sort of drawback as well. I have mixed feelings personally about some of the Dark Age policies, but there's no doubt that you can find some which might fit your victory type. The other important thing that ages will affect is your loyalty, which of course brings me to loyalty. Loyalty is a mechanic they added in the expansion as a way of representing political control over a city. I think it was mainly implemented as a way of preventing AI or humans from forward settling each other, as well as being implemented as a method of curbing fast expanding civs. You can also check out details regarding a city's loyalty in this city panel. At a really high level, loyalty in a city is determined by a few factors. The first, and maybe most major one, is citizen pressure, which is determined by the number of nearby citizens of each civilization. The more population you have near a city, the more pressure you exert on it. But this is of course counterbalanced by the amount of pressure exerted by enemy cities. The amount of pressure exerted by population is also different based on the type of age you're in. In a normal age, each population exerts 1 pressure. During a dark age, however, it becomes 0.5 pressure, and during a golden or heroic age, it becomes 1.5 pressure. Loyalty is also affected by the happiness of your citizens, where the amenities surplus or deficit affects the loyalty in the city. If your loyalty in a city is negative, you'll lose loyalty until your city goes into anarchy and becomes a free city. You'll see an icon on the city noting if your city is losing loyalty, and you can hover over here to see how many turns until rebellion occurs. Free cities are then able to be influenced or captured by other nations, including yourself, but if you do recapture it, make sure you have a strategy of keeping it loyal. Loyalty is particularly important to consider as you expand your empire and capture enemy territories. When you have a settler selected, you might notice that there are some negative numbers that might appear on a tile. That number represents the amount of loyalty pressure that's being exerted on that tile if your city happens to be established there. When selecting a spot, I would be wary of this and would probably suggest only settling in areas without external pressure or places with relatively low negative pressure. I'd say any pressure beyond a -8 can be a little bit tricky to handle. Of course, a question I hear quite often is, how do I increase my loyalty? And there are a couple of key things you can do. Noting the points I made before, one of the simplest ways of increasing loyalty is by increasing your population near the city, although this can be a bit of a slow process. You can consider settling cities near the disloyal city to try and exert more pressure as well, but this could potentially backfire as those cities could flip too. If time allows it, making sure you're in a stronger age will also help increase loyalty, but if you are in a hurry, trading for or increasing the amount of amenities you have will help the city become happier. Building a monument will grant +1 loyalty, and a government plaza also increases the loyalty in a city by +8. Another thing to keep in mind is that loyalty is affected if the city does not follow your state religion. Captured cities will lose loyalty, but keeping one of your units garrisoned there will also help negate this pressure. If you're really having trouble with captured cities, quickly capturing other nearby cities will also help to relieve some of the population pressure. There are also a number of policy cards you can implement which will add loyalty to the city based on certain criteria, such as garrisoning a unit. Finally, one of the easiest ways of increasing loyalty in a city is by establishing a governor in the city, which of course brings me to governors. Governors are an agent you can establish in different cities to help boost loyalty, as well as give your cities different effects and bonuses. In order to appoint and later promote governors, you need to use governor titles. The primary method of earning governor titles is through the civics tree, although there are some other ways as well. With a title, you can then activate or promote a governor. You can choose to establish the governor in the city of your choosing at any time, but keep in mind that it takes 5 turns for most governors to be established in any city. I'm not going to dive into every ability for every governor, but I will give you a general overview of what you might want to use certain governors to do, as well as pointing out some particularly strong abilities. The first one I want to mention is the notorious Magnus. Magnus the Steward specializes in boosting resources, particularly around food and production. His default ability, Groundbreaker, is a really powerful one as it increases the yields you get from chopping or harvesting resources. Groundbreaker is incredibly strong, and in fact it had to be nerfed before. Magnus is really powerful early, as well as when first getting cities established, although personally I tend not to use him as much because I tend not to harvest resources very often. Even so, if you look at what some of his abilities are capable of, I think he is an extremely strong choice for a governor. Reyna the Financier specializes in generating gold income, and can also be useful in establishing cities. Her default ability, Land Acquisition, increases the rate at which the city acquires new tiles. Her upgrades tend to focus on gold generation, and a number of them can be viable depending on the city you place her in. However, her strongest one is probably Contractor, which allows you to purchase districts in a city with gold. This makes her very useful later on when you're trying to establish new cities quickly. Liang the Surveyor is a governor particularly useful in developing cities. Her default ability, Guildmaster, grants builders of the city an extra build charge, which is quite useful. Zoning Commissioner is another useful one early as it helps construct districts quicker. She also has 2 interesting abilities in Aquaculture and Parks and Rec, which allow you to use builders to build special improvements in the city which provide food and culture respectively. All 3 of the governors I just described will likely be ones that you'll be constantly moving around into new cities in order to help them get developed as quickly as possible. Pingala the Educator is perhaps the strongest governor in the game, and is one I would suggest you use no matter what. He specializes in science and culture and is particularly important for both those victory types. His default ability, Librarian, increases science and culture in the city by 15%. Then his 2 level 1 abilities, Connoisseur and Researcher, provide an additional 1 culture and 1 science for each citizen in the city. This makes it so you can easily just leave Pingala in your capital or any other major city to reap massive boosts. And then his last two abilities, Space Initiative and Curator, are both useful depending on what victory type you're going for. Moksha the Cardinal is a governor who's powerful for religious victories. His default ability, Bishop, increases religious pressure to adjacent cities and grants faith for each district in the city. Because of this ability, as well as some of his early upgrades, I think the best strategy in using Moksha is to move him along the borders of your religion. Keep him in key areas you want to exert religious pressure on, and any areas where you might have extensive religious combat. Amani, the Diplomat, is a governor whose main use revolves around city-state diplomacy. She's the only governor who can be appointed to a city-state, and doing so adds 2 envoys to that city-state. Her particularly interesting promotions are Affluence, which grants a copy of a city-state's luxury resource to you, Foreign Investor, which grants you access to the strategic resource of the city-state, and finally, Puppeteer, which doubles the number of envoys you have at a city-state. I would say she's not necessarily the best governor, but she is still useful in influencing and gaining benefits from city-states. Finally, we have Victor the Castellan, a governor who is more situational as his focus is defending cities. Unlike other governors, he only takes 3 turns to be established in a city and is useful if you find yourself under attack or needing to defend a specific city. His default ability, Redoubt, increases the city's garrison combat strength, and his other abilities are useful in helping a city under attack from enemies. But in general, I think he is very much situational and should probably only be used in times of emergency. Speaking of emergencies, this brings me to Emergencies. I won't go too deep into Emergencies as I think they're relatively simple to understand. Basically, if any civ triggers a specific criteria, an emergency can potentially be raised. These can be triggered if a city-state is captured, a civ's city is captured, a holy city is converted, an ally is betrayed, a nuke is fired on someone, or with Gathering Storm, a massive natural disaster hits a civ. If the emergency is passed, then those who voted to participate in it try their best to perform specific tasks, so if a city is captured, it must be retaken and freed to its original owner. Emergencies have a turn limit within which they need to be accomplished. If successful, participants receive rewards, usually gold and diplomatic favor, based on the amount they help to resolve the emergency, and that's calculated by rewarding points to those who perform certain contributing tasks. If unsuccessful though, the offending civ gets rewards instead. Emergencies can be pretty useful and are a cool mechanic which can somewhat deter aggressive playstyles, or make it harder to dominate. If you're aggressive in a game, then you most likely will have to deal with emergencies at some point. But if you're on the other side, I think the main thing I would suggest is to really consider whether or not you think you can win in an emergency. Part of this is just evaluating how strong you are and where you are in the game, and if you think there are others who might join you in the emergency, although that is something I wouldn't rely on. This can be really hard to predict, so honestly, just do what feels right. One other thing to note about emergencies is that I find AI tend to focus on them really hard, so if you're smart, you can potentially use emergencies as a distraction to do other things. In particular, with city capturing emergencies, AI tend to focus really hard on the specified city and will potentially ignore other units and areas in the way. You could potentially use that opportunity to your advantage to severely weaken enemy armies and even take other cities for yourself. Alliances. So next we have alliances. Alliances were always part of the base game, but in Rise and Fall they were enhanced quite a bit. Now, instead of just declaring an alliance with a civ, you can set up to 5 different types of alliances: research, cultural, economic, military, and religious. You can only ever have one alliance type at a time, so be sure to make that decision wisely. The system rewards you for maintaining long-term alliances. You gain alliance points by maintaining an alliance, and additional points for having trade routes with your ally. When you reach a certain threshold of alliance points, your alliance gets upgraded and grants even more powerful bonuses. Again, I won't dive into every bonus there is, but definitely take time to understand what each one does at each level. You do want to be wary of who you make what type of alliances with though, as alliances will also boost their civ as well, which could potentially hurt you if you're not careful. Sometimes, breaking an alliance might be necessary to prevent victory. New districts. Finally, I want to talk about the new district types added in Rise and Fall, those being the Government Plaza and Water Parks. I'll start with the Water Park since there really isn't too much to say here. Basically, the water park is very much like an entertainment complex, and in fact, you can only build one of those districts in a city. If you are in need of amenities and loyalty, particularly later on, water parks can be a viable option, especially if you have a lot of coasts or are playing on island maps. Meanwhile, the Government Plaza is a very interesting district. It can only be built in one city of yours, and it acts as the administrative center of your civ. It grants 8 loyalty to the city, as well as an additional +1 adjacency bonus to all districts next to it. This means If you can, I would try to plan where you want your government plaza to be, and you should try to surround it with other districts to get the most boost possible. Then, within the government plaza, you have 3 tiers of buildings you can create, each with 3 options you can choose from, but be careful, these decisions are permanent and cannot be taken back. At tier 1, you have the Ancestral Hall, which grants a free builder and increased production towards settlers. This is extremely useful if you like to get a government plaza early, and it helps you expand very quickly. You also have the Audience Chamber, which grants +2 amenities and +4 housing in cities with governors. However, you lose 2 loyalty per turn in cities without governors. This can be useful for taller empires, but even so, -2 loyalty isn't that big of a deal, so I think it's pretty solid as you can always use some more amenities and housing. It also could just be more useful as you enter later game. Finally, in tier 1, you have the Warlord's Throne, which grants you temporary production bonuses if you capture an enemy's city. If you're playing for a military victory, or if you find yourself caged in a bit, then this can be really useful, but it does seem to be the most situational of the tier 1 buildings. At tier 2, you have the Foreign Ministry, which helps city-states. It allows you to levy city-state units for half the gold, and grants additional combat strength to your city-states units. Honestly, this one doesn't really seem all that useful, although with Gathering Storm it also grants +3 diplomatic favor per turn, which, I mean, it's something. Next, you have the Grand Master's Chapel. The chapel allows you to build military units with faith, and also provides faith when pillaging. Again, I think this one's a bit more situational, but is definitely useful if you're going for a faith victory, or even if you just have a really strong religion. Then, you have the Intelligence Agency, which grants you an additional spy, and gives your spy operations a higher chance of success. I think the agency is probably the most applicable in pretty much any situation. Spies are incredibly useful, and maybe one of my favorite parts of the game. And I just realized that I never discussed spies in any of my previous guides, so I might need to make a quick Art of War addendum soon. Finally, of course, we have Tier 3. In Tier 3, we have the National History Museum, which grants 4 great work slots of any type. While maybe not the most flashy of upgrades and probably not the top choice personally, I do think it has its uses in cultural victories, as I often do have struggles with great work slots. I'll often have great artists and whatnot standing around for multiple turns, unable to create anything, and it isn't always easy to get more slots. Next, we have the Royal Society, which grants builders the ability to use charges to provide production towards district projects. This is particularly useful for science victories, as this essentially allows you to speed up your science victory project constructions by using a builder. And of course, finally, we have the War Department. The War Department is very useful if you're going for a domination or religious victory, as it heals units up to 20 hit points when they eliminate an enemy unit. And this can actually be kinda huge in keeping your army alive. And there you have it. That is more or less all the new mechanics introduced as part of Rise and Fall. I know this video was a tad bit long, but hopefully it was helpful for people to better understand the Rise and Fall mechanics. Of course, if you have any questions, please don't hesitate to comment down below and I'll try my best to help out. If you enjoyed the video, please consider hitting that like and subscribe button to help out the channel, and of course, I hope you have a great rest of your day. Peace.